All right, good job in the 1NC. I'll go ahead and start with the overview. And before I do that, let me just say I'm probably going to read this pretty quickly so that I make sure that I get it in time. It'll be better for you anyway because you'll get to practice debating against harder debate that way. So the overview is going to be an overview that will have one card in it that you'll probably want to flow. We'll do contention 2 and then contention 3. And then we'll do in order topicality, the counterplan, the spending disadvantage, and the normalization disadvantage. Okay. And go. At the end of the debate, you're going to vote for the affirmative team for a couple of reasons. The first and most important reason is that we're able to stop the number of people who are experiencing food insecurity by providing healthy and sufficient lunches during the context of the school day. Our evidence says that this is actually critical to creating the lifetime healthy eating, and also we solve for the academic things that are not happening in the current system because of the lack of food. Remember that students' brains are not developed yet, so when they're not getting the types of nutrition that they need, they're not going to be able to study well, which hurts the economy. Let's also understand that resolving food insecurity is a necessary prerequisite to resolving all other social ills. It directly undermines living conditions and structurally disadvantages communities. Freeman in 2007, urban communities of color suffer the hardest effects of poor nutrition. Individuals often lack sufficient access to adequate health care and education, compounding the deleterious effects of the diet. Health is fundamental to every aspect of life. Without a student cannot do well in school, reducing the physical quality and expectancy of an individual's life, foster the creation of underclass of people who become progressively more marginalized and powerless. Food oppression is structural because it is not the product of individual acts of discrimination, but it stems rather from the institutional practices of government. This is perpetuated by the myth of personal choice, even where a lack of options and resources severely limit the ability to exercise choice. Too often, advocates of blame low-income people for their own issues, linking the problems to the broader historical context of long-entrenched policies and practices. Remember here, our argument is going to be that literally every other thing, such as the normalization of Trump, the economy declining, and state economy problems, and topicality, all these other things are actually a problem because of the lack of food security. Our plan is the Lynch plan in order to be able to solve that. Let's go to contention 2. My argument here, first of all, they say healthy lunches don't get eaten. Of course, right now the lunches aren't getting eaten at all, which means that there's 5% waste on 100 lunches because there's a lot of people who aren't able to buy them. Compare that 5% of lunch for 100 lunches compared to 5% for 1,000 lunches, which is what happens when the affirmative plan passes, which is that more people are going to be able to eat. This means that we solve more. There's maybe more waste, but that's fine, and that's not a reason to vote affirmative or negative. That's actually a reason to vote affirmative. And also, the plan doesn't lead to more food waste. Increase in quality of foods leads to more consumption, not less. Anderson in 2017, we find no evidence that contracting with a private company that lead to provide healthier meals changes the number of school lunches sold. The test score improvements are being driven by differences in food quality, not quantity. Providing hungry kids with great access to food can lead to improved test scores. Critics worry that the rising nutritional standards, fewer children will eat the food, thereby harming the students. Results provided reassurance that this is not the case. Our evidence here from Anderson, who's a professor of agriculture, actually says specifically that when we provide healthier food, that more students actually eat it. They say we can't fix all poverty, but my argument here is that this actually provides uniqueness because the poverty is inherent in the status quo. Part of it is because of the food security. My argument also is that food is the key to that. That's our McSorville Research Institute that actually says specifically that it creates an underclass of people. Also, the evidence that I read at the beginning here says specifically that poverty is created by the lack of food, which means that only the affirmative actually solves. They say no spillover. Our evidence says there is spillover, that it actually creates healthy habits that lead to adulthood, and is actually better evidence. It's from a professor from the Ohio State University, which means that they've actually studied and they understand what's actually going on. They say the plan doesn't solve education on contention 3. First of all, there are other issues. That's fine, but our argument is that we actually make it better because the Anderson evidence is actually a professor of ag economics, a better source, and deals specifically with how the brains operate. This is better evidence because it talks about how specific micronutrients don't work within the brain in the current system because they don't have sufficient quality and quantities of food, which means that only the affirmative plan is actually going to be able to solve anything. Remember that if you vote for the negative team, they're never going to be able to solve that. Let's go to the topicality arguments. They say that we have to be education and meaning in the classroom. My number one is that we meet school lunches are part of nutrition education. Federal Register on 2013. Nutrition education is any combination of educational strategies accompanied by the environmental supports to facilitate voluntary adoption of food choices conducive to health and well-being. Involves activities in the community level. And number 2 is our counterinterpretation. Anything that is typically administered at the Department of Education is topical. This provides predictable limits. Tang and 16 says the Summer Food Service Program is the single largest federal resource federal feeding program on the Summer Activity Program. The U.S. Department of Agriculture funds these programs through the Department of Education. And 3, our interpretation is better. So point A is that it's predictable. There are only a limited number of things that the federal government can do in education. recession currently. School lunches are one of them. The plan is that, plus we're one of only 5 topical cases for the middle school. This is fine. And B, we provide adequate literature. There's not a lot written, or there's a lot written on this topic. The negative has specific cards against our case. This means there's a sufficient literature base. And C, we provide a bright line that's very easy to determine if we should or shouldn't be topical. If it's administered through the Department of Education, then it's topical, and if it's not, then it's not. This is better than any other interpretation because it's objective. The judges have to be subjective and just use their feelings. And 4 is there's no abuse. We'll argue their arguments directly. And 5, there are other checks. Cross-examination, literature, solvency advocate, and case limits all check against the problem. And 6, we're reasonably topical. If we're topical enough, that's good enough. We don't have to prove that we're the absolute best case. We just have to prove that we're topical enough. Let's go to the counterplan. Number 1 is PERM. Do both. Both federal government and all 50 states will do the plan. And number 2, the USDA, which is a federal agency, is key. The counterplan ensures states decide how to regulate on a state-by-state basis. This is bad. Schilling 11 says ownership over mandates can become convoluted. The synergy and alignment begins at the federal level of programs. If mandates don't start at the federal level, then they become interpretation based on 50 states. It's not the federal law to start with. Then it becomes the isolated, individualized, state-by-state decisions. And the counterplan alone can't solve. States alone don't have the necessary funds to complete the transaction. AIDCA in 2014, districts are having problems implementing the KIDS Act. GAO reports found issues with state compliance. Federal reimbursement oversight issues created problems with the programs. If they are non-compliant, the states in non-compliance reports take action to address problems. Due to the KIDS Act and the new guidelines, under the law, states can authorize compliance and grant 6% of the federal funds to school districts over lunch served. Without the proper non-compliance, programs' integrity will be at risk. And the state-by-state issue means patchwork, means the counterplan doesn't get to eat all the schools. They specifically won't get to poor schools. This undermines the economic benefits, which means they don't solve contention 3. Ansel 17 says education and health. Other countries were reaping the benefits of high-quality early care education programs. These are one of the best ways to reduce economic inequality. When investment in younger children is implemented on a national scale, research shows that it creates more productive workforce and creates a boost to the overall economy. And theories that 50-state fiat is a voting issue. Subpoint A is the opportunity cost. No actor has the power to implement a counterplan that compared the plan proves the illogical and utopian comparison. And B, the affirmative grant and the uniform fiat and multiple links to the affirmative were contrived advantages based on jurisdictional and diplomatic questions, which moves the debate from the core question of regulating education to more contrived issues. And C, it distorts literature. Even if there is evidence to support the counterplan, none of it assumes uniformity in fiat, which undermines education. This is a voting issue because that's the only way to stop the negative team from doing this. Let's go to the spending disadvantage. My number 1 is malnutrition actually leads to an ill-prepared workforce and undermines overall competitiveness. This means the case solves the disadvantage. In 2009, child hunger in the workforce problem. Workers who experience hunger as children are not as well prepared physically, mentally, emotionally, or socially perform effectively. Who experiencing hunger as children create a workforce pool that is less competitive with low levels of skill. And the U.S. economy is already heading towards a recession. The best data points this way. From Zollinger in 18, a lot of economic data we see on a regular basis lagging behind. It tells us what already happened in the economy, not what could have happened ahead. One data that's worth watching is business inventories, U.S. economy. The leading economic data is very clear. U.S. economy could be taking a turn for the worse, and the recession could actually become a reality soon. A recession for the U.S. economy is looking like a real possibility soon, and government spending is actually good. It jumpstarts the economy, as these in 2014. It can, government spending can reduce unemployment by directly creating jobs during something, especially one as bad as the last recession. Many companies were unwilling to reinvest in the economy for fear of losing money. Government spending may be the only option available during the severe and deep recession. In the real world, investors and markets can be depressed on for months, and the economy is going to collapse anyway due to other things. This means there's no reason to vote negative. Ryan Today. Economists, trade experts, and investors all worry that President Donald Trump's recent tariffs could be a problem for the U.S. economy. Even top advisors in the Trump administration are admitting the same. Tariffs can undermine the economy's steady growth. During the interview, Wallace highlighted the strength of the Friday job report and asked if Trump's tariff on steel, aluminum, Chinese goods could jeopardize the progress of the labor market and the economy. And let's go to the normalization disadvantage. My number 1 is Trump is being viewed as more normal now. He's able to distract people by tweeting, and people love the fact that he's meeting with North Korea and with Kim Kardashian. They like those things. And 2, there's no impact. Democracy is dead. The rise of the alt-right in Europe proves this. Waxman in 18, democracy is over. It does not work for everyone. We're entering a different world. We could be too tight to our past. Halter was referring to the resurgence of virtual nationalism across Europe, and the adjective failed to bring democracy to a place like Iraq to fight all the blood and money expanded by the United States. And 3, turn a stronger leader like Trump through normalization would actually hurt democracy. Adler in 18. One of the strongest warning signs for democracy has been the rise of populist left leaders with the authoritarian tendencies. While these leaders have been more popular, it is unclear whether citizens explicitly support more authoritarian styles of government. I find, however, evidence of substantial support for a strong leader who ignores his country's legislature, particularly among centrists. In the United States, centrist support for strongman leader types are far more than the right and left. As Western democracies descend into dysfunction, no group is immune to the allure of authoritarianism, least of all the centrists who seem to prefer strong and efficient governments over the messy democratic politics. And finally, there's no reason that feeding some hungry kids will make Trump seem normal. Nothing can do that. He's a wacko.